Has another meeting, and I'm glad he could be here.
Thank you, Senator Sessions and Madam Chair. I'd like to go to Mr. Hall right off the bat. Similar type of question. Mr. Hall, you talked about our workforce being 4.5 million people short. Can you just tell me where you're getting that from and explain that?
Well, sure. If you look at what's typical participation rates by age, for example, the participation rates in 2007 were rather different than they are right now. And so really what I just did is I just looked at every single age and looked at what the participation rate was in 2007 and what the participation rate is right now, and you find that we are short in terms of the average participation at every single age range between 20 and 54 right now, and this is pretty significant. So the part of the issue I think that we really need to face is getting people back engaged in the labor force. This is not just baby boomers that are retiring. This is every age. Young in particular, actually, have really dropped out of the labor force, and I think that's a real concern going forward.
Okay, you're just talking about a shortage in the labor force. You're not saying there's 4.5 million jobs available that aren't being filled.
Well, that's right. That's right. In fact, you know, if you were to look at where we're short on jobs, we're short on jobs probably 10.5 million people, jobs actually.
We had a pretty interesting witness before the Budget Committee here last year. Gary Alexander, who's the Secretary of Public Welfare in Pennsylvania. He had a pretty interesting study that he conducted on single moms, which showed the disincentivizing nature of, you know, all the assistance programs. Basically, his conclusion was that a single mom was better off only earning up to $29,000 because her combination earnings plus benefits totaled $57,000 versus earning $69,000 where her combination income and benefits would be the same amount, basically $57,000 after tax. In other words, she had a 100% maximum tax rate from $29,000 to $69,000 with increased taxes as well as reduction in benefits. Can you just speak to, you know, that type of problem in terms of incentives not to continue working?
Sure. Yeah, you know, I don't want to, we need the social safety net. That's an important thing. But we need to be very aware of what sort of incentives that creates with our policies. Keeping people, making it hard for people to re-enter the labor force and making it hard for businesses to rehire people, I think really creates a problem. And so many people out of the labor force for so long is a problem because the longer people are out, the less likely they are to ever return to the labor force. So to some degree, we can make people unemployable by keeping them out of the labor force for a long period like we've seen.
You know, I agree. We're a compassionate society. We all want a strong social safety net. The problem is, how do you design that social safety net where it really stays confined to those people that really need it and doesn't start creeping into populations where it creates this kind of disincentive for participation in the labor force? My final question really has to do with mobility. We always talk about income mobility. What about geographic mobility? And what effect, I mean, there are jobs wanting up in North Dakota, up in those energy fields. In the state of Wisconsin, we have 18,000 welding jobs that are unfilled. So what is the effect? I mean, why do we no longer have that mobility? Why do people feel like they really shouldn't go to the areas where there really are lucrative jobs for the taking?
Well, certainly sort of physical location mobility would be something that would slow down a recovery and make it difficult for folks to recover. And that's really a good point that we have a very weak labor market, but not everywhere in every industry. There are industries where you can see some real issues with difficulty finding workers, qualified workers. That's the sort of thing we ought to worry about is mobility of all different types, because that's a real strength for an economy.
I'd just like to ask the other witnesses, do you have any comment on that lack of mobility, or, you know, the fact that we simply, you know, people aren't moving to where the jobs are?
Yeah. One of the problems is that when people have very little wealth, because they're, you know, the people at the bottom have no wealth. In fact, a lot of them have negative wealth. They can't afford to just take the risk of moving somewhere else. There's a piece of legislation, I don't know whether it's in the House or the Senate, been introduced to try to provide assistance to help people move, mobility assistance. And it's gotten bipartisan support. And I think it is an important kind of measure because people don't have the resources to up and move. Part of the reason is the severity of the housing crash. people at the bottom had a very large fraction of their wealth in their housing, always. But then the house prices came down, they were over indebted, they've been sold wrong mortgages, and so this has become exacerbated, which is something that's always a problem, but the Great Recession has exacerbated, and the data that's recently come out from the Fed about the wealth at the bottom has really highlighted this particular problem. And I think it is something that Congress ought to be doing something about.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you
And
very